Hello and welcome to the Smarter Food Supply Chain webinar series. I'm Mike Ellen and I serve AIM as their Member Engagement Manager. AIM North America is an alliance enabling the cooperation, development, standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to IoT, AIM North America is your advocate. Any organization with an interest in data collection is a beneficiary of these efforts. Membership provides an opportunity to influence the direction of the industry, develop policies and standards, access market reports, and engage new partners. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. On the first slide, you see our antitrust policy. It's the policy of AIM Inc. to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. Our collaboration and work product policy states that committee meetings and presentations are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. Also, if you have any questions you would like answered by Jeanne, please send those after the presentation to mike@aimglobal.org. I will get those questions over to her. Today, I am here with Jeanne Duckett of Avery Dennison. Jeanne works on transparency initiative development and also serves on AIM North America's board of directors, AIM North America's food policy, and is AIM's track and trace chairman. Jeanne will be discussing the role of barcodes and RFID in tech-enabled traceability. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our continuing series of AIM Global webinars on the Air Smarter Food Safety. Today, we will briefly discuss the history of barcodes, their data content, and standards around the data content, which is fueling the digital transformation of the supply chain. Automatic identification and data capture technologies include a diverse family that share the purpose of identifying, tracking, recording, storing, and communicating essential business or product data. In most cases, AID technologies serve as the front end of enterprise softwares in the emerging consumer IoT, providing fast, accurate, and situationally appropriate data collection and data entry. Today, we're going to discuss how barcodes got involved in automatic identification and data collection. We're going to discuss the concept of G10 Plus and what is enabled when we move beyond simply identifying a class of items to identifying each and every unique item. We're going to look at what application identifiers and data identifiers are and the ISO standards behind those. We're going to discuss some new and emerging data carriers. We're briefly going to touch on sensor data and what the functionality that is fueled by including more than just product static attributes to product conditional information. Then we're going to close with some thoughts on how this all impacts the culture of food safety. The familiar black and white bars of the Universal Product Code, the UPC, that appears on nearly everything the consumer buys is so ubiquitous that we scarcely think about them anymore. Yet 50 years ago, barcodes were really a disruptive technology that promised to revolutionize the way businesses tracked and managed inventory. Little known, before the familiar bars, which were first conceived of in the 1940s, was the RCA rotary code of the 1960s. The picture at the bottom left of your screen is a Kroger's shelf in the 1960s with rotary codes on the bottom of the cans. And now the picture on the right is now the familiar first scan of the UPCA barcode at Marsh's grocery store in 1974 in Troy, Ohio. Barcodes fulfilled the promise of more efficient inventory tracking, but that was just the beginning of the evolution that's continuing today. Their early success in the grocery industry triggered the development of dozens of type of barcodes in multiple of applications, from identifying massive ship and rail cars marked with 2-foot long barcodes, as shown on your screen, for the high-speed data capture, to the next picture, which is displayed, direct part marking on medical devices with tiny barcodes. As barcodes and applications proliferated, so has the advancements in the corresponding technologies. Newer types of barcodes now pack in more data and are increasingly interactive and deliver unprecedented levels of accuracy and productivity across the supply chain. These carriers include 2D codes such as the now consumer familiar QR code, and 3D codes, which are embossed on parts and products such as the medical device example on the screen, to various types of wireless technologies for non-line of sight data capture. G10s are encountered most frequently at retail point of sale and on inner packs, cases, and pallets of products in a distribution warehouse environment. They are commonly used on purchase orders and delivery and payment documents. The G10, or the Global Trade Item Number, uniquely identifies trade items at all item and packaging levels, thus ensuring they're correctly identified and uniquely identified anywhere in the world. Each trade item is different from another in terms of class identification, and each class, such as watermelons or romaine lettuce or apples, are issued a unique G10. The rules for assigning G10s ensure that every variation of an item is globally unique. This concept, which was introduced back in 1969 as part of the Grocery Manufacturing Association, is a very, very powerful one. The idea that products could have globally unique identities is fueling today's digital supply chain. MHI came out with the MH10 item unique identifications, and they developed the transport label, ISO 15394, which specifies the minimum requirements for the design of labels containing linear barcodes, two-dimensional symbols on transport units to convey data between trading partners, and provide for the traceability of transported units, including these unique identifiers. The ISO standards around the MH10 item unique identification include the license plate, which is ISO 15459, code 128, country codes, ISO 3166, the calendar, date, and time format, ISO 8601, and the structure of data in high-capacity symbols, such as 2D codes and RFID tags, ISO 15434. You see an example of an MH10 transport label in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So what is identity, or what are global trade item numbers? Correct product identification continues to be very necessary to sell through traditional retailers as well as online marketplaces, including Amazon, Etsy, or eBay. The UPCA barcode, aka the UPC code, are standardized global identifiers which enable products to be sold, reordered, and tracked throughout the supply chain. Accurate product identification starts with globally unique item identification per the ISO 15459 specification, upon which is enabling these supply chain transformations. Global trade items number inventory tracking for simple counting of objects. So the very first concept that was implemented back in 1974 is we're going to count all cans of green beans. However, as electronic data interchange, or EDI, started growing in popularity in the 1990s and early 2000s, it became necessary to identify items uniquely to track it. This initially began with shipments, with the Serialized Shipping Container Code, or SSCC. But then starting in the mid-2000s, the garment industry began tracking each article. So to begin with, back in the early 70s, we would have just counted the simple number of blue, medium-sized football jerseys that we had. But then starting in the mid-2000s, the garment industry began tracking each article. For the first time, it became desirable not only to know that I had 5 medium jerseys, but that 3 were made in plant A and 2 were made in plant B. This drove a greater level of inventory accuracy in omni-channel retail. It enabled traceability and provenance or transparency for consumers, including such information meeting the growing consumer desires, such as was this organic cotton, or was there any child labor involved in the manufacturing of these garments. Then starting in the mid-2000s, we started to see a host of regulations and initiatives, fueled by the G10 attributes and the ability to uniquely identify items below the G10 or the class level. This is becoming known as the G10 Plus identification. So the first one of these regulations, the Unique Device Identification System, was intended to assign a unique device identifier to medical devices within the United States. It was signed into law in 2007 as part of the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007. And this act included language related to the establishment of unique device identification systems. And this system requires that each device will bear a unique identifier specific to that particular instance, and this unique identifier will be able to identify the device through distribution to point of use, and this unique identifier will include the lot or the serial number. Next, in 2008, the Produce Traceability Initiative, sponsored by the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, the GS1 US, the US Produce Marketing Association, and United Fresh, was designed to help the industry maximize the effectiveness of traceback procedures by developing standardized approach to enhance the speed and efficiency of traceability systems. The PTI had a very bold vision. It outlined a course of action to achieve supply chain-wide adoption of electronic traceability of every case of produce. Next, in 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA as it became known, was passed into law in response to a growing awareness of foodborne illness. About 48 million people in the United States, 1 in every 6, 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die each year from foodborne illness. This significant public health burden is in fact largely preventable. The FSMA Act is transforming the nation's food safety system by shifting the focus from responding to foodborne illness to preventing it. Congress enacted FSMA in response to the changes in the global food system, with the realization that preventable foodborne illness is both a significant public health problem and a threat to the economic well-being of the food system. The FDA was mandated as part of this law, and this law is quite comprehensive. We have an earlier webinar series discussing it. But the FDA was mandated to take specific and determined action in creating the designation criteria for high-risk food. This designation of high-risk food is required by FSMA Section 204D by September 8, 2020. The publication of this rule for record-keeping and electronic data traceability for the designated high-risk foods is required by FSMA Section 204 by September 8, 2020, and the final publication of the rule no later than November 7, 2022. The FDA will designate which foods are high risk when they release the information about the upcoming rule in September of 2020. And the last one I want to touch upon is the Drug Quality and Security Act, or enacted by Congress in November of 2013, better known as the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. And this act outlined the steps to build an electronic interoperable system to identify and trace prescription drugs as they're distributed in the United States. This is going to enhance the FDA's ability to protect consumers from exposures to drugs that may be counterfeit, stolen, contaminated, or otherwise harmful. Additionally, the DSCSA directs the FDA to establish national licensure standards for manufacturers, wholesale distributors, third-party logistics providers, and point of dispense, requiring products to be uniquely identified with a global identifier, a lot code, serial number, and expiration date. Whether at point of sale in a hospital or in a pharmacy, this environment is going to allow and specifies the use of a 2D data carrier, the data matrix, to be able to trace back that particular container or that particular instance of a product's path all the way through the supply chain back to point of production. So in addition to these initiatives in the United States, there are many more initiatives that I'm not covering both domestically and globally. Some of these include the Fighting Illicit Trade in Europe, covering tobacco, the European Traceability Act, and the Australian Traceability Initiatives. So in response to these demands for greater data carrier capacity, a host of new data carriers and standards have emerged to handle these capacities and also to enable new methods of data capture. Different barcode symbologies act differently in the way they represent data and the type of data that they can encode. Some encode numbers, some encode letters with a few punctuation characters, others offer encodation of 128, 256 character ASCII sets with capacities up to 2K or 4K. Newer symbologies include options to encode characters in any language as well as specialized data types. Barcodes in common use are covered by international ISO standards. And international ISO standards also cover print quality measurements and equipment. Barcode technology standards define the rules for representing data in the optical readable formats, rules and techniques for printing and marketing, reading and decoding techniques, and the rules for measuring the quality of the marked symbols. Other emerging identification symbols include RAIN RFID, along with NFC or near field communication tags, which are playing a similar role as the enhanced capacity barcodes to be able to carry unique instant identification along with enhanced attributes. After developing varieties of linear barcodes, auto ID engineers found that they could get more data into the same space with 2D technologies, which are also readable in any directions. This is driving some very exciting new applications, such as the serialization, labeling of pharmaceutical products tracked through the supply chain, for instance, in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. Food supply chains, for example, are under a lot of pressure to be able to trace food back to the point of origin and to manage incidents of possible contamination, therefore protecting the consumer. In the United States, this was covered by the Food Safety Modernization Act, which we discussed. In Europe, it's covered by the Food Information Regulation, which became effective in 2014. Requires all food and beverage served in restaurants to include allergen and country of origin. So with this growing and emerging concept of G10 Plus is ever expanding, additional attributes are encoded into data carriers to follow the product along its life cycle, moving beyond supply chain efficiency to become important tools for consumers in terms of ever-growing demand for detailed product information, safety information, product status, including recall, product use, and recycling. And I have up listed on the screen some of these enhanced product attributes like the serial number, the lot number, and the expiration date as required by the pharmaceutical traceability, weight, in the case of variable weight measurements such as proteins, and the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability by the World Wildlife Fund has put a great deal of effort into developing interoperable standards covering the catching either wild or farmed fish products through the supply chain to the consumer. These types of products include attributes of interest such as catch zone, catch method, first freeze, and etc. So what's emerging here is this concept of a digital twin. A digital twin utilizes a globally unique product identification tied to a digital avatar of the item. Between now and the time that digital twins become ubiquitous, we're likely to see data carriers capable of carrying the G10 Plus information as a guide path to a fully digitized supply chain. Facilitated by this ability to uniquely identify items below the class level, the needs to standardize on common events is emerging and common event attributes, including the standard language for what, when, where, and why an event happened. In the same way that creating standards around global identity, creating standards around events will enable interoperable event information exchange. In 2019, Frank Yenis, Deputy Commissioner of the FDA, stated that the opaque food supply chain is the Achilles heel of food safety. Recently, in the guidance released for leafy greens by the FDA, calls on a focus on interoperability in food traceability. So I want to briefly touch on some emerging data carriers. What you're going to notice in common about emerging data carriers is one or two or both of the following. They're going to have an enhanced data capacity. They're going to change the way that they're captured to make them easier and more ubiquitous. So starting with the JAB code, which was introduced in 2019, the JAB code is trying to address the fact that traditional barcodes or QR codes are pretty two-dimensional. These 3D barcodes, such as the JAB code or just another barcode, adds a third dimension in color. JAB codes were recently introduced, as we discussed, but the idea of color symbols goes back to the late 1980s. Traditional barcodes assume that you have a pretty crude sensor, but now that color cameras are becoming commonplace, why not take advantage of them and use color as an added dimension of data capacity? The JAB system specifies two types of symbols, a master symbol and a slave symbol. The master symbol has the four finder patterns in the corner. Slave symbols dock onto the master. This exponentially increases the amount of data that can be stored. The next symbol, the Barcode, which was introduced by MIT in 2011, promises even greater benefits. Barcodes simply are a visual tag on a 3 millimeter wide, but they're capable of holding thousands of times more data than traditional barcodes. And then increasing with the data capacity is the distance that they can be read from. They're changing the distance from a few meters by any standard digital camera, including those built into digital phones. This concept has a great potential for growth. Barcodes, as I mentioned, were developed by MIT, who saw the opportunity to upgrade the standard barcode, which is relatively large, limited in the information it can carry, and can be read from a short distance, to one that can be developed a new and flexible interface between people and machines. And then the last one I want to discuss on the far right there is passive Bluetooth technology, starting introduction and test around the 2016-2017 timeframe. Imagine a Bluetooth chip, which it's unlimited lifetime, in a small sticker that can process power and sensor for a fraction of the price of the existing Bluetooth beacons. That's what is emerging in this capacity for passive or energy harvested Bluetooth. The next thing I wanted to talk about is sensor data. Now that we can globally, uniquely identify classes of product, then we're adding attributes to it, creating these G10 plus, so that we not only identify globally a class of products, but we uniquely identify each instance of the product. We're starting to develop sensor data. By arming supply chain participants with real-time information about their inventory, machining, and purchase materials, smart sensors are creating a visibility across the supply chain and are going to fuel data analytics and methods of accessing and interacting with products that have never before been seen. Some of these are going to be how fresh is the product, what's the current condition of the product, is this product fit for use? These information, what I'm showing on the screen here, are all temperature sensors, but this information can encompass a wide variety of sensors, including CO2, vibration, forces, among others. Shown on the screen and the top right of the screen is an active powered or a battery powered or electrical powered system. These systems have the advantage of having a lot of range. They tend to be a little bit more expensive. On the bottom left side of the screen is this concept of passive sensors. Passive sensors like passive RFID or passive Bluetooth harvest energy or have a partially powered system, which greatly reduces the cost and size of the sensor. And then finally on the bottom right is basically a totally passive system, which is just color printed thermally sensitive paper, which reacts in this case to temperature. You can also have paper substrates or material substrates that react to the presence of a variety of gases. So bringing it all together. So this continuation of this concept of G10 plus in 2020 with the data content and the data carriers in the supply chain from production to consumption is going to continue to emerge throughout this decade. Back in the 1970s, we thought of symbols and data as interchangeable. People were very used to referring to both the barcode and the data in the barcode as a UPCA. What we have learned is that we need to standardize the data content and that there's going to be an ever-changing, improving set of data carriers. But with standardized data content, you ensure the first step to interoperability. Then we discussed that product data is moving beyond static attributes to include sensors to describe the product's current status and what environments it may have been exposed to along the supply chain. Finally, we briefly covered that in addition to standardized identities and product attributes, we need to standardize locations and events of interest that take place as the item moves through the supply chain. These events of interest are called critical tracking events, and the elements commonly used to describe those events are called key data elements. So some of the functionality that is enabled by this evolution you see there on the lower right-hand side. And these data carriers and data are fueling these applications in FIFO or inventory management, first in, first out, inventory accuracy, whole chain visibility, strategic product recalls, waste reduction and sustainability, traceability and transparency throughout the supply chain and down to the consumer. Thank you very much for your attention to this seminar. If you have any questions, please reach out to Mike at AIM Global. I'd like to call out that we have a couple of upcoming sessions of the AIM North America Era of Smarter Food Safety webinars. On March 25th, 2020, Elizabeth Sinclair is going to cover what is the culture of food safety. And then on April 8th, we're going to look at developing approaches to help ensure the safety of e-commerce by Terry Myers from InfoTrab. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed the seminar.